One. Here we go. Hey everyone. Hey, long time no see. It's been a while. I've been very busy. I've been going down to Columbus, trying to get a bill passed down there. Been working with several congressmen and senators to get a bill on the floor up in D.C. And also needed some time for myself. The whole month of April, I was in the hospital. So, hey, y'all know how it is. So, very special show tonight. As a lot of you have been hearing me, it's time for us veterans to start sticking together, start looking out for each other, start educating ourselves on what bills and actions are being taken for and against veterans. This show is definitely going to show you why. So tonight we have Caitlin and Kayla. They are from the great state of Virginia, and they've got a problem down there in that state. So, ladies, who wants to go first and tell us what's going on down in Virginia?
Do you want me to start, Kayla, and then hand it off to you? I was there earlier, but you've gotten into it really, really thick lately.
I can give the 30-second version or the 3-minute version, and then you can add on. How's that?
Okay, sounds good.
So back in March, there was language snuck into the budget bill, House Bill 30, that significantly cut the Virginia Military Survivors Dependents in Education program. So this is a program that provides 8 semesters of tuition waiver to the dependents of either Gold Star families or people who are 90% plus permanently and totally disabled. So the initial language that was placed in on page 641 of the budget bill with no reference to the program whatsoever. So we've heard from numerous legislators that it was snuck in. That was the term that was used. Thankfully, we were alerted to this and we were able to quickly gather a petition that had 4,000 signatures, handed it to the governor. The governor responded with a couple of amendments saying that this needed to go to a study before changes took place. The governor, who is a Republican, the House is controlled by the Democrat. The House and the Senate are both controlled by Democrats. So there's some politicking involved in this whole situation. But the governor responded with amendments. The House said, we don't accept any of your bill. We're going to scrap it and start from scratch. So the 11th of May, the new budget bill was released with even more restrictive language. And I can walk you through some of those changes. But it was released with basically the largest rollback to veterans benefits in the history of the state of Virginia and potentially even nationally. So it was released Saturday afternoon. Sunday was Mother's Day, and then it was voted on Monday. And so there's a 48-hour window that's required, and I mean 800 pages of that in less than 48 hours is not anything anybody wants to deal with. But ironically, it was on page 641 again. And the language that was in there was even more restrictive than the previous budget bill.
Oh, man.
So I don't know if you want me to highlight specific changes that were made. I think I can go through all those. But the bottom line is it went from being a service earned benefit to a basically financial aid program that I don't believe would be able to be utilized by anyone. So it went from first payer to last payer, and they required everybody. So the new language would grandfather anyone who was enrolled in a program for the fall by the 15th of May. So if you go back to what I said a few minutes ago, the budget bill was signed the 13th of May. So the grandfathering deadline was less than 48 hours later, and you had to be committed to a school. So the problem with this is that there's a 5-year mandatory residency requirement prior to using this program. So there are people that have moved here. They may have kids here. You know, I've got a 13-year-old, for example. We meet the residency requirement right now, but he's not going to college for a few years. So we made the decision to stay here for that. But giving a 48-hour window with these drastic changes, you know, you're required to now fill out a FAFSA. We don't have a problem with the actual FAFSA, but the problem is then you're required to pay your either what used to be called the expected family contribution, which is now called the student aid index. So the FAFSA has been a complete disaster for all college and university admissions this year. Every other school in the state of Virginia has pretty much extended their deadline. Everybody in this program was still mandated to be required to have committed to a school by the 15th of May. So, and here's the kicker. You're also required, after you've paid your EFC, you're required to contribute your Chapter 35 funds. So Chapter 35 and EFC become the first payer, and the state of Virginia becomes the last payer. So the average expected family contribution in nationally is around $14,000. Well, that exceeds the cost of tuition. So for those people that have an expected family contribution of $14,000, the program pays nothing now. So even if you fall under that, then as if you didn't get hit once, now you also have to pay your Chapter 35 money, because it says all 38 USC Part 3,
Right.
dollar for dollar, is a first payer.
And it's not like these kids are going to be able to use Chapter 31. That's VOC rehab or VR&E money. Chapter 33 is the GI Bill. And, not everyone has transferred GI Bill benefits. This had to have been a play for Chapter 35 money, or else incredibly dense, but harmful.
Okay. So basically going with the first payer to the last payer thing, what they're doing is defunding. It sounds like they're defunding the state portion of this entire program.
Well, currently it's a waiver program. So it is an unfunded mandate. Now, there was some money that was put in the budget this year for the very first time to make it a funded mandate. So it's been an unfunded mandate.
For nearly 100 years. It's a long established program in one form or another.
And correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of colleges don't even send out acceptance letters until like the end of May.
There were kids that were waitlisted. I mean, that put them in a real bind. And also a lot of schools have rolled back the date by which students had to commit. Not that they use the word commit typically, but you say you're going to go to their school from 1 May. I think George Mason made it 15 May. I've now heard Christopher Newport made it 1 June. Haven't kept track with it. There may be schools that are still allowing people to accept.
According to the State Council for Higher Education meeting that took place 2 days later, there were schools that had extended their deadline as far out as the middle of July.
Really? Okay. I didn't catch that. I did catch that our FAFSA submission rate in Virginia this year is 21% below where it was expected to be because of the disaster that the simplified FAFSA turned out to be.
Now, as I don't know if Kayla knows, but I know Caitlin does, I advocated for the PACT Act, which included survivor and dependent benefits in that bill.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these programs that Virginia is doing should be covered by the PACT Act, which makes it mandatory for the state to give these benefits.
That I can't speak to, and I'm a little embarrassed to say I have a law degree, but the PACT Act is not my area of expertise, if I even have one.
Because that was one of the things that we fought very hard for, because before the bill was even written, many service members died from their exposure. So that was leaving their spouse and their children with absolutely nothing. So we got it put into the bill so that they could at least use the education benefits, and the surviving spouse would get survivor benefits. But since those are state-funded programs, the PACT Act made it to where that the state had to make sure that these benefits were available.
Kayla, something we should be looking into, perhaps. Thank you, Tim.
I think there are a lot of things we're looking into at this point in time. We're still unclear how you can mandate the use of Chapter 35 federal funds to access state benefits.
Right, exactly. It's
the supremacy clause should prevent that.
Even if I'm a little bit wrong about the PACT Act, for a state to even think about taking away benefits that a veteran earned for their family, It's mind blowing.
And it's been so ludicrous. When I first heard the rumors about this, it was mid-February, and it was a young student at George Mason University at a veterans event who said, "Oh, by the way, Caitlin, I was told that I was going to have to give all my Chapter 35 money back because there's a new state law, or there's a new law in Richmond that says if I use VMS DEP, I can't have Chapter 35." And I went, "Whoa, stop!" But the point being that it was just so garbled and strange from the get-go, and it's really, in some senses, gotten even more convoluted to understand what's been going on. But no, the state cannot mandate that you retroactively give back a whole bunch of federal benefits. This has just been hard to believe. But they do seem to want to force the usage of Chapter 35 for tuition and fees, whereas I kept telling people it makes for a great package. The state waives the tuition and fees, and the federal government comes in with Chapter 35, and you've got room and board money or rent and food money, and you have this great structure. And instead, we have the state of Virginia causing it to collapse on the heads of, in many cases, 19, 20-year-olds. It's just ludicrous.
So we started a group. I'm one of the co-founders of it, called VMS DEP Friends, at the beginning of April in response to this. And one of the things, so we have a Facebook group. It was about 350 people the day of the vote, which was May 13th. We're now at 2,000 people. So if there's any indication that this is an issue that people have not been made aware of, there was no notice provided. And the challenge is we're dealing with vulnerable populations here. So we have veterans that are 90, 100%, Gold Star families. These are people that are not in a financial position to flex and, out of nowhere have to pay between $40,000 and $80,000 over a 4-year degree with no notice, right? Like that's just not right. Most of us are not in that position. But the problem is we're also having people that have PTSD that are having to go back onto medications. We have had one person that I would say has been on suicide watch. People that have PTSD need stability. Most of us that have retired here or that are here, we don't want to move again. So we're invested in the economy in Virginia. Virginia is the #1 recipient in the nation of defense dollars. There was a statistic that I heard the other day that Virginia receives $500 million a month in veteran disability pay. So in terms of our financial contributions to the state of Virginia, I mean, I think that the concerning thing nationally is if this can happen in Virginia, and it can get, my husband likes to call it legislation without representation. But if this can happen in Virginia, the #1 recipient of defense dollars, we've got the Pentagon here, we have more bases than I can count. There's 700,000 plus veterans in the state, then that's pretty terrifying. And where else could it happen, and what form could it take? And the idea that veterans benefits are so easily expendable is really terrifying.
Yeah. And I gotta apologize to both of you and to the audience that I'm on my laptop because my main computer decided to go kaput minutes before showtime. So I had all kinds of statistics, all kinds of slides made up. I have none of that.
Happens.
Yeah. So we're winging this tonight, folks. So please bear with us. Now, Kayla, if you could type in the name of the group into the private chat, so this way I can make a runner that goes on the bottom of the screen so people know what the name of the group is. Now, Caitlin, while she's doing that, how did you all find out about
it's an interesting tale. One, I'd had my pulse or my finger on the pulse of VMS DEP for a couple of years because I've been dealing with a Chapter 35 issue. And I knew that they went together really well and that Chapter 35 was shaky, but we had this wonderful program in Virginia that veterans will tell one another about because it hasn't been well advertised in the past. And there was an effort to educate ourselves about it. So when I heard that rumor in mid-February, I started by going to the Fort Belvoir Education Center. A couple days later, I had an appointment at the TBI clinic there and thought, well, I'm right here. I might as well go and ask questions. And I was met with hostility, and it was strange. So I thought, okay, that didn't work, but I know how to drive to Richmond. And luckily, that Friday, I was able to go to Richmond. They were in session at the General Assembly building. I bumped into a veteran who is a delegate who said, "Caitlin, no, don't worry. Nothing happened. The governor asked me to put in that bill that would essentially destroy VMS debt, but I didn't do it." And he and I both, I think at the time, honestly thought that that was the end of the story. But it turned out that a bill had been put in on the Senate side. It later was converted to a study. You can find it online. It's SB 347. And we've since talked to the sponsor of that bill, and he clearly wasn't the person who wrote it, who has told us there was language in there that was too extreme. I wanted it converted to a study as soon as I actually read it. But we also thought that because it had converted to a study, everything was okay. Well, it turns out this end run through the budget process had to have already been in play under cover of darkness, shall we say. So the 21 lines of text that were slipped into HB 30 really did gut the program, turned it from an earned into a needs-based program, no master's or no upper level degrees. Kayla's given you a lot of the basics there, but it was pretty horrifying. But I only found out about it because I stopped in at a local college a week or so later for a totally different reason, and have a good relationship with the military student office there, and just stopped in to say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, have you heard about?" And I said, no, really, that's not going to happen. And they said, "Oh, you need to come into this office and we'll print some things off for you." And I was handed 2 very alarming sheets of paper that I've kept by my computer now for 3 months. So anyway, that was late February, maybe early March. And then I went back to Richmond on the 21st of March for a women veterans pinning ceremony. And luckily the Library of Richmond steered me towards the Senate legislative fiscal analyst on the 13th floor of our very nicely renovated building. And she sat down with me for about 25 minutes and said, "Yes, this is going to happen. Your only hope is to get a line item veto." Line item of 21 lines, actually. And that's where it all started. It was right before Easter. And luckily there was a pre-existing Facebook group, and I was able to figure out how to put a post up. I had never done that before. My vision issues make me stay away from computers if at all possible. But it was 3:30 in the morning on Easter Sunday, and I was desperate. And luckily I managed to figure out how to put a press release up. And that was the beginning of finding Kayla and several other key people. We've been pretty amazing, wouldn't you say, Kayla? I mean, it started with 4 or 5 people that really banded together and turned it into a real movement. We've been told we've been the most effective grassroots campaign that they've ever seen in Richmond. We just still need to achieve success and get this stopped.
Well, and I think that most people recognize that, for the veterans and military spouses are not people that go down easily. We're used to juggling the unknown at a moment's notice. And so I like to joke that they kicked the wrong hornet's nest. But the reality is we've had a couple of, so after the bill was signed, so we spoke to the governor as he was walking in to sign the bill. We said, "Sir, this is the largest rollback to veterans benefits in the history of the state. Why are you signing this?" And he assured us, "Oh, we will fix it. We will get a study group together to look at the unintended consequences." Okay. But if you haven't signed the bill yet, sir, they're intended at this point if you go ahead and sign it. So bottom line is he a few days later, he puts out Executive Directive 7, which establishes this task force and says that he wants the scope of that study to look at the unintended consequences of the budgetary language, which why would you put a study together after the fact to look at what the consequences were? I mean, that just kind of doesn't make sense, but hey, he's trying to do something. So we move forward, and Caitlin and I are both on this task force, but I have some concerns about the task force because if the scope is simply to look at the unintended consequences, I mean, we can tell you that right off the bat, like that's not the issue. The issue is that we've had inconsistent and incongruent data. So I have the sheet that Wendy King, the lady in the Senate Finance Office, provided the day of the vote. And those numbers do not match the numbers of a presentation that was given in the House Appropriations Committee last week. So we have been calling for a special session to repeal the language and to go back to what the original language was. pending a study, because the reality is, without knowing what the numbers are, if the Department of Veteran Services has one set of numbers, the State Council for Higher Education has another set of numbers, and the universities have a completely different set of numbers, so there's no triangulation of data, then why are we making decisions based on data that is at best inaccurate? So we've been calling for this special session. The governor announced on Monday that he was asking the leadership of the House and the Senate to go back and to repeal the language, because he's heard our cries that it's impacting our community, that it's not going well. Mind you, he also ran on the fact that he wanted to make Virginia the most veteran-friendly state. Clearly, that's not congruent with that. So now it's we've been talking to leaders. They've been responsive. They're listening. I've talked to the Speaker of the House today. He says he wants to come back. He wants to solve the problem and continue to have conversations moving forward. So we're hopeful that this special session will happen, that the language will get repealed, but I still have pretty significant concerns about the limited scope of the task force. And I believe that it really needs to be comprehensive, and it needs to deep dive in terms of, what are the numbers? What is, for example, they're saying that the program costs $80 million. Well, they're imputing full fee cost. So it's in-state tuition cost, but they're imputing full cost. But we know that when you add another kid to a classroom, the cost to the school is not the full cost. So it's like retail versus wholesale. And everyone that we've asked for what is the marginal cost to educate a student cannot give us an answer about that. I mean, it's just...
And Kayla's great with the numbers. I have to stick to a very narrow example, but I have a child at Virginia Commonwealth University, which happens to be the school with the greatest usage of this program. And they reported it to be 439 students in school year 2022-23. Some of those 439 would have been part-time students, but they're viewed as full-time because that's the only way the program tracks people. So 439, we'll agree with that. But then they put out a press release on January 3rd of this year that essentially says, we love our military community, but VMS STEP is unsustainable. And they use the number nearly 1,200 students are using this program. I just cannot logically believe that from one semester to the next, 439 students turned into nearly 1,200. I think they must be rolling GI Bill recipients, possibly even VOC rehab, and maybe even ROTC students in to get that large a number that suddenly. And this is just a small dot example of how the numbers are just wildly inaccurate, it would seem. And Kayla's definitely been the numbers cruncher, but where there's smoke, there's often fire.
Yes. Now, what representative, I'm not quite sure how Virginia's state government set up, because here in Ohio, we have a Senate and a House,
Yes.
just like in DC. Same in
Same
Virginia.
here. Yep.
So
Exactly the same.
what representative or senator introduced this?
What's the budget bill? So it's really thick.
So
This is the magic of why it got through and why we're grateful for a special session now. When it's the budget bill, you get an up or a down vote only. You can't strike anything. The Republican senators all put in what's called a yellow sheet, which basically means they vote for the budget, but they do not vote for these portions of the budget. They're in the minority, so they were not stricken. But because it was put in the budget bill, there's no particular person that is claiming responsibility. We've asked, but there's no particular person that is claiming responsibility for putting this in. We have some ideas, but going back for a single vote issue, which is how this should have been legislated to begin with, will be very telling, because most of the representatives in the state live in areas that have a large military population. That's simply the nature of the state of Virginia.
right.
So I think it'll be interesting to see if there's any difference in how people vote on a single vote issue versus, this omnibus bill that's got so many different things in it that you can't parcel out. And there's no ability to strike or negotiate for language in this 800-page monster that they had to, read and interpret in less than 48 hours.
I can only imagine the person who was typing that up was thinking when they saw that they were going to try to cut all this out.
I was told on the 21st of March that suddenly, after nearly 100 years, they were trying to put it in with the senior citizen waivers. Most senior citizens that take one Spanish class, are just totally different from the families who've lost someone in uniform or have
Right.
caregiving duties for a veteran who's rated 100%. It's just apples and oranges. That was so ludicrous that suddenly 90 some years later, it was imperative that they be lumped in with, or that this tuition fee waiver be put where the senior citizen waiver is.
Well, and here's something else that's really interesting. So it's put with the senior citizen waiver, but without being ageist here, who is going to contribute to the economy of Virginia in a longitudinal sense? Is it going to be, spouses that are going to have to potentially take over some of the income earning potential for their family, or surviving spouses, or, dependent children? Like, these are people that are most likely in the state of Virginia long term. They are most likely taxpayers. They are most likely contributing to the economy of the state. So if you're taking a class at 65 plus versus somebody who is 30s 40s and has at least another 20 or 30 years work wise, the rate of return clearly on the younger group is going to be more over time.
And especially because this program, the one we're concerned with, includes literally 18-year-old kids, the prime college education. Right. Education is an investment, not just in the individual, but obviously for the state. They will get their return, as Kayla is saying.
Now, obviously, some of the people that were elected into the Senate and the House down there are veterans themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So they already know what dependents go through when they're on active duty. So in order for them they must have just either got blindsided by this and didn't know what they were reading, or that they absolutely just stopped caring about their fellow veterans and their families.
I think they care. I think the blindsided part, though, is very true. And I know when I dropped off my first press release at the Richmond Times-Dispatch office on the 1st of April, no April Fool's joke intended here, I was lucky enough that the political reporter came down and took it from me personally. And I asked him, what am I missing here? I went to law school. I thought I understood how government works in the United States. And he kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, that's Virginia. When they can't get a freestanding bill through, they legislate through the budget. It happens all the time. Thank you. And luckily, since then, they've given us some really good coverage. But April to May was a bleak stretch, trying to convince people that this was really something that needed to be fought. But like Kayla's husband says, this is what
legislation without representation.
Yeah, we see that on those DC license plates or some variant of it. This has just been unbelievable that we have the ability to affect change undemocratically in Virginia, and we just take it. And so maybe that's the silver lining here. If we can fix this, and I think we can, at least we hope we can, maybe we've also shown a light on the fact that this cannot continue, whether it's veterans benefits or other issues that are of significance to Virginians. They are meant to be introduced as freestanding bills so that there can be notice, comment, discussion, debate. This has been terrible.
Well, and here's another little fun fact for you. So in July, I believe, of 2021, Virginia became the first state to consider military spouses and dependents as a protected class. So in addition to all of this, here is this protected class of people that their waiver program gets cut in a year where Virginia has a $2 billion surplus and no other waiver programs were cut. So, I mean, the whole thing is just, it's like a bad movie, but I mean, it's like, so we're going to balance the budget that we have a surplus on the backs of Gold Star and disabled veteran families. I mean, it just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
And the numbers have gone up. The usage numbers have gone up, but they were actually expected to go up, desired to go up. The commissioner's report, the Department of Veteran Services commissioner last December put out a report, as he's required to annually, that said that the goal was to increase the usage to about 9,000. It's currently at a little over 6,000, or at least it was last year, and it might be 6,400. I think that's the number I've seen lately, Kayla. So a very small group of people, but you can see it going up because we've had 2 decades of 2 wars. And more importantly, perhaps the VA is much better about doing ratings relatively quickly. I wouldn't say seamlessly between active duty and post-military service. And so the numbers have gone up. It's not that they're going to go up forever. There will be a backside to this curve, hopefully, as long as we manage to stay out of future wars. This is just a reasonable cost of war, and we need to live with it, just like we buy bullets and tanks when we're fighting the wars. And Virginia stepped forward, and we're all grateful for that as citizens to help shoulder that burden, but then to turn it into a bait and switch at the expense of our children and our spouses, that is unacceptable. And it makes people like me angry. I came out of the shadows for this one.
And not once they start doing this, they try to get rid of a certain type of benefits. Then they're going to look somewhere else and say, "Oh, we got rid of this. We can try to get rid of this now, or we can try to get rid of that." It's like a domino effect. So I'm afraid this is going to happen down in Virginia.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to me that this would happen in the state of Virginia specifically. I mean, it's the idea that, I mean, people are able to go to college in the state of Virginia and not have to worry about being drafted because of people who have literally given all, or, all of themselves. And even if people do come back, there are all kinds of consequences, physical, mental, that, fortunately, most people in this country do not have to deal with. And we know that people come back from war differently than they left for war. And so, the people in higher education, I don't feel there's an understanding or appreciation that they were not drafted, that they did not have to do that. So I think it's challenging to translate to the general population the exact impact that being a disabled veteran has on one's family, on oneself. I mean, the strength that I've seen from some of, I'm going to call them Gold Star sisters because they've just been phenomenal, is the things that they have to do. And the way that they set the language up was most disadvantageous to Gold Star spouses. So because they get a life insurance payout, their FAFSA amount looks higher than everybody else, but that is intended to cover the loss of their loved one and loss of income over a period of time. I mean, it makes Virginia, it makes the state of Virginia look at us now as liabilities instead of assets. And we have to take into account the possibility of reprisal from public universities. I mean, I'm wanting to use the program myself and was set to start prerequisites this fall. Do I have concerns about retribution and retaliation in terms of my application process at this point because I've stuck my neck out for this? Yeah, I do.
Understandably.
Oh yeah, I know how you feel on that. Because, man, and you're right. Because I know when I came back from the war, I wasn't right. I've got all kinds of illnesses and diseases that I'm battling, plus PTSD, and so meeting all these Gold Star families in DC, knowing that they were, not receiving any benefits at all because their veteran died due to toxins and other types of exposures instead of actually being shot and dying in that way. It put a lot of stress on the spouse themselves, not just the kids, but the spouse, and fighting to get what their veteran earned for them. And this is basically the same thing. It's going to throw even more pressure onto the families. And
Tim, if I can add to that, I am the veteran in my family who makes our family eligible. And it's been hard to be the trailing spouse overseas while my husband was still on active duty, trying to be the supportive Army wife, going, but there's something wrong. And every time I reached out to the VA, being told, but you have a degree and you have a husband and he's an officer, you should be fine. And having to live with that existence, and then coming back finally to Virginia and going, oh, there's this great program. Someone actually values me. Someone sees the benefit that my family will produce in Virginia if we put down roots here, if we get education, if we stay here, if we contribute. And so I really took this benefit at more than just its face value, but as sort of a psychic Band-Aid. It made up for a lot of the damage that the big VA had done. And then to have this happen, it's been a huge breach of trust. It makes it really hard to believe that anyone will live up to their commitments, especially if I can't find them and put eyes on them. And the state is obviously a little bit too big to do that. I think that's been really harmful to the whole community, especially once again, the Gold Star families. I mean, they've given so much, and to have this all come up right before Memorial Day, absolutely uncalled for. And so if not for us, for them, this is something we have to pursue. And I think Kayla and I are both willing to stand up and be named. It hasn't been easy, and there may be repercussions. Being on the task force has been kind of a surprise. I appreciate it. I will do my best, but I also will not shut up. If there was any intent to silence through position, it's not going to work.
Now, I want to let people who are watching right now, the chat is open. So if you have any comments or any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll get it to the ladies so they can answer them for you. And now, knowing what spouses and dependents go through, how much does this, thank God my wife has a very good job, because if we had to live on my VA compensation and my Social Security, we would not be able to make it. I can only imagine now there are probably spouses and dependents looking at their bank accounts going, oh my God, if I have to pay for college now,
right, with
what are we going to have to give up? What are we going to have to get rid of?
And Tim, one of the things that has really bothered me as someone who grew up thinking women had jobs and careers and earned their own money, and then I was, in fact, the veteran, it really bothers me that for those of us who do have a living spouse, suddenly it takes the benefit that I earned in lieu of money, and it puts it on the shoulders of my spouse, who's already carried more than a half share of the burden. And then when you think about it that way, you go, and what if you're a Gold Star survivor and there is no other parent in that family? All of a sudden, you've already been carrying extra, and you've just added another rucksack to your load. It's doing a real bad number on families, especially if they have multiple kids. I know.
Well, the reality is that most, I mean, I'm a Navy brat myself. I've had 6 years of my whole life that I haven't had TRICARE. So
really,
it's in my family. It's in my blood. All my male relatives have served. So most of these children that were intending to use this benefit in the fall have not had a normal childhood. They have not had the same childhood that, they haven't lived in the same house. They haven't had the same friends, didn't go to the same elementary school, didn't go to the feeder middle school, didn't go to the feeder high school. If they were able to be at the same high school for 4 years, they were lucky. So these are all challenges that you then add the concept of disability or loss to that. And it really is compounding. And so for them to have the idea that, I can go to college and that's taken care of because of the trauma that I've had to live through my childhood. Mm-hmm. And now there are parents in the group that are having to have conversations with their kids of, you're not grandfathered in. You may not be able to go to school this fall, or you're not grandfathered in because we missed this deadline because we didn't know about the deadline because nobody said anything about it. There was no public announcement. There was nothing on any website. The people that were already enrolled in the program didn't receive an email from the state. There was nothing. And then, I mean, some of them are saying, well, we're going to go to community college this fall. Well, guess what? You can't commit to a community college. So
Right.
there's no proven commitment to a community college. So even the ones that are saying, well, we missed the deadline, maybe you can go to a community college, as it stands today, that would still be on the family. So there are a whole bunch of first, second, third order consequences that were very clearly not thought through. I think that if had stakeholders been involved in any capacity or any step of this process, we certainly wouldn't be where we are today. There have been, and I do want to say this, there have been a handful of legislators on both sides of the aisle that have been very supportive, that have listened to us, that have tried to buck their party, buck the system to really push through and help us. And I have to say specifically to those people, they have been phenomenal. They have restored my faith in humanity. But because they're a minority in both parties, we're really hopeful that people are going to come back and do the right thing now that they understand what the consequences are. But, it's like the little red hen, right? We're saying like the sky is falling. And people are like, oh, the sky's not falling. The sky's not falling. Oh no, like now the sky really is falling.
Right.
Right.
And I was saying that during the session, once I realized what was happening, we still had about 2 weeks where someone could have listened, but there was no official channel for family members, for real end users of this program to be able to communicate. When I actually tried to reach out to our current commissioner of the Department of Veteran Services, I was able to meet him in the lobby of his building, where he told me that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And I think that's absolutely the opposite of reality. So that person was supposed to be there as our sounding board, as our ears, and instead he shut me down. So that was actually after the session had already ended anyway. So officially that wouldn't have helped at that point anyway. But I had been trying since early March. And no one was willing to listen at that point. There was no connection. And I think that's something that will come out of this. We will not let ourselves be the last to know next time, if anything needs
well,
to.
and I think the other thing to talk about here is that in 2019, the legislation was changed. So this program, like Caitlin said, has been in place for almost 100 years. In 2019, ironically, the gentleman who introduced the 2019 bill has been one of the biggest opponents to it at this point in time. His name is Luke Torian, and he is in Prince William County, which is right next to Quantico. But he proposed and passed a bill in 2019 that expanded this to include non-combat. So up until 2019, it had been specifically combat only, 90% plus, Gold Star families. And so what also happened the year after 2019? COVID. So we didn't have regular attendance at institutes of higher learning during that period of time. So I think part of the compounding factor, or one of the compounding factors for this specifically, is that we have people that are returning to higher education now at a different rate because COVID is over. And so people are returning. So you're seeing the growth from people going back to school from COVID. You're seeing the growth from the allowance of people with non-combat injuries to be included. Now, people that have combat related, there's called tier 1 and tier 2. So if you're combat related, you get a stipend somewhere between $1,800 and $2,000 a year. But the reality is that the number of combat related people has also increased in the program proportionately. So, the reality is that the number of veterans in the state of Virginia, according to the National VA, is going to decline over the next 10 years, over the next 5 years, over the next 15 years, over the next 20 years. We're kind of at like the top of the mountain right now, and you're going to go back down. So I would really hope that if they repeal the language and they go back and we're in this task force, that they will expand it to look at what are the projections for veterans for the state, because the reality is we could be at a peak right now. It could increase for maybe 1 or 2 years more, but then we know that their projections were off because the numbers were off in terms of what they were handing out to people the day that the budget was voted on. I mean, they've even redacted and gone back from those numbers. So, like I said, we have different sets of numbers, but they've even corrected those on a downward trend in terms of projections. So I really hope that the data from the National VA, looking at what the trajectory for veterans is in the state, the fact that we are not at war right now, the fact that, I mean, we're also there's a retention crisis in the military, in case anybody hadn't noticed.
Yeah.
Right.
As well as a recruitment crisis. So, there was I'll read it directly because I know I'm going to mess it up, but the quote from George Washington that says, "The willingness in which our young people are likely to serve in any wars, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they're perceived the veterans of earlier wars were treated and appreciated by their nation." I would very much like to ascribe that to the state of Virginia. Like, if God forbid something happens and we have to go back to war, people that have watched this happen, how are they going to feel about that?
Right.
And we're publishing things like this, the Virginia Military Friendly Guide. It just seems kind of hypocritical right now.
Now, I just want to go back a little bit to what Kayla was talking about. Dependents going on to college. I've been doing a lot of research on veteran suicide because I'm trying to get some bills passed on that. And one thing that struck me the most about dependents was outside of the family unit, them going on to college is probably going to be where they have the longest relationship with any human being outside of their family. Because, you may be stationed at a base for like 3 years, but your friends,
Come and go.
veteran, they're leaving maybe 6 months after you meet them. So this is going to be the most social interaction that these dependents receive. And if they can't figure that out, saying this is probably where dependents are going to develop the most is in college.
Well, and I think everybody would argue that post-COVID, there is absolutely what I would call a mental health crisis in this country, particularly among young people, and particularly people that were in middle school and high school during the time of COVID, even upper elementary school. I mean, younger kids, I feel like it's been less impactful in terms of mental health. At least that's what studies have shown. But, the idea that, I mean, my son's in this situation right now. He's getting ready to go to high school. And we made the decision to send him to the high school that he's going to because he has not spent more than 2 consecutive years at any school in his life. He's 13 years old. So for him, we said, we want you to go to this particular high school because you can have 4 years and you will be in one place for 4 years. And these are going to be your people, right? Like, this is the opportunity for you to have your people. And so for many people, you're exactly right. I mean, for me, I had 11 moves before I was 20. Yep. So for me, college and grad school, it was like, yeah, that's amazing. Like, I'm actually with the same people. Like, what does this thing look like when you have these sort of long-term relationships? How do you manage that?
Right.
And one of the things I'd like to highlight is the part of the language that was alarming to us was the removal of upper level degrees. And I think that's because there's a perception that spouses are using this program in excess. Well, they're not, as far as we're concerned, but also younger kids. We have kids that have done dual enrollment and AP credits as high school students. They work hard. They're from military families. They know how to buckle down and get their work done. And they thought they were saving these tuition and fees waivers so that they could get through college, maybe with a combination of those credits, community college, transferring to a 4-year institution if they weren't necessarily seeking that 4-year experience, and going on to get, say, a master's in social work because they'd seen what their families, either on active duty or as veterans, had gone through. And that really would have been an investment in Virginia. They would have been licensed as social workers here in Virginia, making it even more reasonable to suppose that they were going to stay here and benefit this community, this state. And instead, they're being told it's on you if you did dual enrollment, AP credits, and even paid for some community college out of pocket, thinking that would help you on the back end. Sorry. And so there are just things that were not thought out well.
Well, and to piggyback on that, Caitlin, it's a little bit disgusting how the messaging coming from some state officials has tried to pin the rising cost of tuition on VMS students.
Right.
And so they've completely failed to take into account inflation, faculty salaries. We even heard rumblings that cuts were deliberately targeting so that they could have cash to pay athletes because of these new NC2A rules. There's all kinds of that stuff going on. And at the same time, to piggyback on what Caitlin said, the spouses that are using these for higher education degree or postgraduate degrees, excuse me, every single one that I am aware of in our group that is doing a postgraduate degree is in an area that the state of Virginia would define as a critical need. So for Virginia, that is education, that is healthcare, and that is STEM. So if we are literally putting tax dollars to recruit people from outside of the state to bring them in, why would we not educate people that we know are going to stay here, that we know are going to contribute to the economy long term, that we know don't want to move anymore? Because when you're done with the military, you do not want to move anymore.
Right.
Like that is it.
Right.
I joke the next time I'm moving is into a box into the ground because I do not want to move ever again. So why are we not? And so these are some of the things that I hope that the task force and the study will look at and will suss out as these areas of critical need and potentially funding streams. Because if we're paying for people to come in from out of state, but we could actually just educate and keep people here, why can't those funds be diverted in such a way to make this program more sustainable? And, if we're bringing in people from outside, that just makes absolutely no sense, because it could be a win-win to then have that money go to, spouses or children that intend to contribute to the economy of Virginia long term.
Amen.
And then to take that money away from veterans, dependents, and spouses and say that they need it to pay off these student athletes, that gets me even more upset.
Well, and there's a concern about what's going to happen in 2026. And that will be 18 years after the birth rate dipped during the Great Recession of 2008. Universities have known this for 15, 16 years already, that they were going to have smaller incoming classes in 2026, 27. Why not take our families where we didn't have that birth rate dip necessarily because we had stable employment, 2 wars, we had housing, our houses weren't being foreclosed on in many cases, and we also had healthcare, TRICARE, like Kayla had as a kid. And those families may be able to buffer the empty seat issue for universities here in Virginia if we just saw them as a value added, and the fact that curve is going to decline for military and veteran families. It's kind of like flying space A. There is an advantage to the institution in filling seats, because then at least they don't pay the seat tax when you land in Germany. Well, in this case, you at least keep students in the dorms, and the dorms are capacity or close to capacity instead of growing mold because they're empty.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I keep telling veterans when I do my show, is that we need to start sticking together. We need to band together. We need to, if you're in California and you're upset by what's going on in Virginia, then you need to, educate yourself more on what's going on there so it doesn't happen in California. Not that it's going to happen there, because I think California, is pretty stable as far as dependent and spouse benefits. But like in Ohio, they're already trying to take benefits away from us here in Ohio too. So if you are a veteran and you're in Virginia and this is getting you upset, then this is the time you need to get off your butt, get active. If these ladies are throwing a rally somewhere, attend that rally. Get in contact with them to see how you can help out.
Show up on June 10th in Richmond at the War Memorial between 2 and 5 p.m.
There you go. And I'll have you send me that information so I can put it in the description when I post this on YouTube and on Apple and all that. So this is one of the things we've been trying to say for a few years now, is being a veteran is kind of like being in a fraternity. It's a very special community, but we're starting to get lazy, and we're allowing stuff like this to happen that's happening in Virginia. So it's time get off our lazy butts. It's time to get on Congress.gov. Type in veterans in the search bar. You'll see every single bill that's in the Senate, every single bill that's in the House. You can do this on Virginia's website. You can see what bills they have going on. And if there's a bill that you don't like, then you need to speak up. If it's a bill that's going to help you and your brothers and sisters out, being fellow veterans, then start contacting your elected official and say, please vote yes on this. It's time, people. No more sitting down. No more saying, oh, I've had my fill when I was in the military. They're not going to make any changes for us. Yes, changes have been happening because of other veterans getting up, talking. Spouses, they've been actually leading the way. Spouses are going like, wait a minute, this bill's going to affect my veteran. I need to speak up about this. So the time is now, folks. The time is now. There is so much going on in Washington, D.C., and in every 50 states, and in Puerto Rico as well. You got to start getting involved. You got to start looking at what's being introduced as bills. Because like here in the state of Ohio, one bill that that's getting ready to be signed by the governor is a bill on asbestos exposure, where if you were a veteran and you were exposed to asbestos, you cannot file a claim in the state of Ohio and use what you used to get your claim approved with the VA. They will not use that. You have to start all over again. You already went through it once. Why do you have to go through it again? There's a homestead tax bill being introduced in the state of Ohio right now where they want to change it from, well, when it was first written, it was for all veterans to not have to pay property taxes. Now it's just for Gold Star families. I'm not Gold Star family. My wife will never be a Gold Star. Well, not for a while. But it's, this is why I've been stating for a while, folks. You got to get involved. You got to put your political affiliations, your political beliefs off to the side. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Independent, or Democrat. What's happening in all these 50 states and in Washington, D.C. affect you personally. You got to get educated on them. I can't keep coming on here and saying, vote for this bill, vote for that bill. You got to figure it out for yourselves. You got to get more involved. And I want to thank Caitlin and I want to thank Kayla for coming on, educating us on what's going on in Virginia. And Kayla, what is that date again for the next rally?
So it's the first task force meeting is June 10th. It's from 2 until 5 p.m. in Richmond at the War Memorial. And they have already had 200 people sign up to speak. There are at least 50 people that I think wanted to speak virtually, but they are not going to be able to accommodate that. So the fact that there are 200 people wanting to speak, that's pretty awesome. So yeah. I hope that we can get even more people to show up there just in terms of solidarity.
All right. And we got a message in the chat here by Kathy. Kathy, I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name here, but I'm going to show it on here. Okay. And I'm going to post that website again so you can see it. And it's going to be in the description too when this gets posted on YouTube and Amazon and Apple. But there's the website again. So Kathy, I want to thank you for asking for that, because now that sounds like you're going to want to get involved. So I thank you for that. And let me bring that down here for a second. And Caitlin and Kayla, I want to thank you for coming on, especially on very short notice.
Great.
I just want. Can I make a little closing statement here?
Sure can. Sure can.
I just want to say I think the most interesting part of this whole process for me has been I have never been someone who has been involved in politics. I vote in elections. That's it. I live on a farm. I have chickens. I have 2 kids, 2 dogs. But I think that this is a really powerful statement to people that want to get involved in politics or want to make a difference. That it really can just take a couple of people getting together and standing together behind a single idea that principally is wrong. So I think that that's part of it, is that this is really what our country was about. This is what people go overseas to wars to fight for, is the democracy that we have here, where we can have these kinds of conversations.
That's right.
Where we can say, you know what, I'm sorry, government, you guys messed up. Like, this is wrong. You did it in the wrong way. It needs to be fixed. But our legislators are supposed to be working for us. And so the reality is, now that we are hopefully going back for this special session, I'm really hopeful that people will understand the impact that this has had on our community. And I really hope that they realize going forward that, this program is 1% of the higher education students in the state of Virginia. It constitutes less than 10% of the total tuition waivers in the state. Why were we picked on? I don't know, but I certainly hope that they realize that this is not the group they want to pick on again.
And we are strong. I can't resist this clothing statement, and also the military side of it too. But the spouses have really earned their stripes on this, and it's been great to be part of this kind of group. It almost reminds me of being back on active duty. We have a mission, and we can accomplish it.
Yes. And one little closing statement from me too is, hey, look, folks, people died so you can vote. That is that's the number one freedom that we fought for, was for your ability to vote on who was going to run your country. Use it. Don't sit there and gripe and moan and throw something at the TV when you get upset. Get off your butt, get involved. And yes, Kathy, let me bring that up for you one more time.
It's VMSDEP Friends.
Yep. Let me bring up this one here.
And this is, this is a great example for all of us that spent Mother's Day on the phone and not with our kids because we were working this issue.
Right.
It's really a good example for our kids in terms of, what does it look like to participate in a democracy to try and affect change? What does it look like to fight for something that is wrong? How do you do that? What do you need to do? And reality is that people can make a difference. And I'm hopeful that the outcome that we get to at the end of the day, I hope that, one, we've made a difference, even if it's for only a couple of families, even if it's not my family, even if it's not Caitlin's family. If we can improve this for some families, that is the goal. But I also hope that we have accountability for our public representatives, and that that this does not happen in the future. And quite frankly, I would love for there to be some kind of legislation passed that specifically, and I know that there's something like this in the Constitution already, but I would really like it as, they can call it the Kayla bill if they want to. I really do not want, I want this to be something that is never allowed to happen to any group again, ever. Not in Virginia and not anywhere.
All right. Now, if I can get you two to stay on as we go off the air here, I want to thank everybody who's watching live now. You can go to Veteran Central on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch it again. All my episodes are on there from Veteran Central. The podcast used to be called the Gulf War Advocate, but I was only getting Gulf War veterans to watch. But we cover everything. So, but yeah, if you two can stay put for a minute. And folks, I want to thank you. I do not know who we're going to have on next week, but we will have a show next week. So we'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you, Tim.